Today we start a new chapter in this year in programming because we will start with Entity Framework. It will be our next big chapter after we discussed some C# recap, some .NET recap. And as I told you, this is very relevant when you think of your Matura because some of you will choose C# as your programming language of choice for building the backend for the Matura example. And then you will definitely need to store something in a relational database because this was an important part of your education here in this school. And therefore, it is absolutely relevant what we do here, and I will try to prepare you as good as possible for really being fit in this topic and having enough knowledge to easily pass the Matura example. Okay? Good. I have in my slides, you have a question? No question. Just stretching yourself. In my slides, there is a chapter here which says Entity Framework. You see it here. We don't need the slides now. I think slides are boring to a certain extent. So in this lesson, we are going to build an example together, step by step. Okay? I will point you to the relevant chapters in the slides if you need them. But today we will just do an example. Later on, just to be sure that you don't need to write anything down, you can take a look in the slides and you will see all the things that we now discuss. You will find them in your slides, like building a model, setting up the context, writing data with related sets, querying data, and so on. You have examples for that in your slides, but just reading the slides is boring. Therefore, we do an example, okay? The next thing that I would like to point out is I have created a cheat sheet for you. You can find this cheat sheet in my HTL C# repository in the folder Entity Framework. Here you find the Entity Framework ASP.NET cheat sheet. In this cheat sheet, I have gathered the most important links to the documentation, the most important function names and code snippets and command line commands you need for interacting with Entity Framework. So you don't need to read the whole documentation. The most important things are summarized on this cheat sheet. Okay, I created it originally for .NET Core 2. Now I updated it for you for .NET Core 3. If there are still some mistakes in it, please excuse that. I will fix it. So it should already be nicely usable with .NET Core 3. Good. So I ask you to open this cheat sheet because you will need to copy some code from this cheat sheet. And again, you can find it in this repository, in this folder, and this is the name of the cheat sheet file. Good? Good. Let's start by creating a brand new solution. We will build something from scratch. So please start Visual Studio 2019 and create a new project. Create a console app, .NET Core console app. I will show you later on how you can embed it into an ASP.NET Core app, but now we'll figure out the basics using a console app. Select any folder that you like. I will say hello EF core, whatever. Entity Framework Demo. That's fine. Any name, whatever you like. Let's create the project. Here it is. Good. Now, recently, Microsoft has released the first .NET Core 3.1 preview release. I don't know who of you keep your software always very much up to date and who of you works with preview releases. It now depends on whether you have already installed the latest and greatest preview bits, because then you will need to follow along using .NET Framework 3.1. If you have not updated your system, and that's perfectly fine, and you are still using the production bits, then you have .NET Framework 3.0. Has anybody already installed 3.1? You can check that easily. Just right-click on the project, go to Properties, and see whether you have the target framework 3.1 already in your list of frameworks. Anybody updated already? Yeah, okay. Anybody else? Good. So the majority of you has 3.0, so please select 3.0. I think that applies just to you. So go into right-click into the project properties and select .NET Core 3.0. And additionally, that's again just for you. The others are fine. Please create a file in the directory of your project, and it should have this content. This tells all your command line tools that you would like to work with .NET Core 3.0 and not 3.1. For those of you who didn't install the preview and who don't have 3.1 already on their laptops, forget that one. You don't need it. Of course, there is nothing wrong with .NET Core 3.1, but it's a preview release. So a preview release is sometimes broken, sometimes makes problems. Therefore, we will stick with the 3.0 version. Good. Please try it. Please compile the application, build it, run it. It should say hello world. If that is the case, we are ready to go. Doesn't it work? It works. Good. I will try it too. Yes, it says hello world. That's fine. Good. Now, the first step that you have to do is a one-time step. You don't need to do that for each project. We need to install the entity framework tools globally on your laptop. Please run this in the command line. This command that you see here is the first command in the cheat sheet. As I mentioned before, it is a one-time command. It installs it globally, and you only need to update this when you update to a new version of .NET Core or .NET or Entity Framework Core. Typically, for the rest of the course, you just have to run it once. .NET tool install -- global .NET-EF, like Entity Framework. Did it work? Any problems? No? Good. What is this entity framework all about? Entity framework is a so-called object relational mapper. It is a tool with which you can access a relational database and process the results with classes and objects. That's the whole core of entity framework. To put it simply, it makes it really simple to access a database. And that's exactly what we want. Have you ever worked with a object relational mapper before? Maybe in Java? Yeah?
I worked with it in the project.
Oh, I see. In the project you have.
We did it last year.
Last year? Uh-huh. Where? In C#. Okay, I see. Good. The next step, and this is a step that we need in this project, is we need to install the proper entity framework package. This entity framework package depends on the database you would like to use. Does anybody not have any version of SequelServer on his or her laptop? You don't have SequelServer? Very good. I was hoping you said that, but you have Docker, right? Yes, you have it because it was a homework, and I'm sure you did your homework. For those of you who don't have SequelServer installed, let's try to run SequelServer in Docker, okay? And we do that as follows. You just go to, for those of you who have SequelServer installed locally, that's fine. You don't need to do that. You can if you're interested, but you don't absolutely need to. Go to hub.docker.com, and there you just look for SequelServer. The first result should be Microsoft SQL Server, and please note it should be a verified publisher because it's the official image from Microsoft. And a little bit down below, you see a statement which says starts a Microsoft SQL Server instance running as SQL Express Edition. The free SQL Express Edition. You see that one? Just copy this code. The whole line, copy it, copy it, copy it, until the colon here. We don't need the stuff here at the end. Okay? Just MS SQL/server. That's all. Good? And now you go into a command line, something like this, paste the statement, and please don't forget to change the super secure password here. Okay? Here, I don't know. Whatever password you would like to use. And give it a try. And then you should see a very long hex number, if everything works. For those of you who are following along, you don't need to write that down, you just can copy it from here. Doesn't make sense to write it. Any kind of password, whatever you like. Did it work, or do you have any problems? Did it work? So you can say docker logs FA06. This FA06 here is the beginning of this long hex number. Of course, for you it will not be FA06, it will be something else. Please use whatever is on your screen. And if you run it, you should see some logs. Not good, it crashed. Ah, and I see the problem. If we are on Windows, we need to remove the quotes here. They prepared the command for Linux. Looks much better. Yes. Yes, yes, yes. This is how the Docker logs output should look like once it worked. So all I had to do is I had to remove the quotes. Yep. It doesn't work. Let me see. Now if you have any tool installed with which you can access a SQL server, you can immediately try whether your server is really running. All you have to do is you have to start the tool, for instance SQL Server Management Studio, something like this. Say localhost SA and the password that you have chosen in the command line. Localhost SA and the password that you have chosen in the command line. And if you click connect, then you, congratulations, have run your first SQL server inside a Docker container. Nice, right? You don't need to install any software. It runs inside of this Docker container, and if you kill this Docker container, everything is clean again. It doesn't leave any traces on your laptop. It's really, really nice to do that. You don't need to install any software, just pull it down from the Docker Hub and it works. Does it work? Does anybody have problems? Good. So this was another first glimpse into the world of Docker. You will learn more about Docker in the course of this year. So keep it running. That's fine. Now we can go back to our Visual Studio to take the next steps. Now that everybody has a SQL Server running, we can add Entity Framework for SQL Server. And we do it as follows. Right-click on the project, go to Manage NuGet Packages, as you can see it here. Go to Browse. And in your cheat sheet, here, you will find the name of the package that you have to look up. Our package is called Microsoft Entity Framework Core SQL Server, but of course if you want to use it with a different database vendor, for instance MySQL, Postgres, SQLite, whatever, then it would be a different package. It would be Microsoft Entity Framework Core SQLite or whatever. In our case, it's Microsoft Entity Framework Core SQL Server. This is what we look up. You should see that, and we install it. And now things depend on whether you're using 3.1 or 3.0. If you are on 3.0, please select the latest stable version 3.0. You could also have used 3.1 at this position, but we decided to go for 3.0, so please take the latest stable version 3.0 and install it. Should be done in a few seconds. Of course, we read all the license agreements. Now we have read the license agreements and we accept them. This is the first NuGet package that you have to install. Later on, when we work with ASP.NET Core, we don't need to install this NuGet package. It comes automatically with ASP.NET Core. But now we are in a very simple command line tool, and therefore we have to install Entity Framework manually. Good? Any problems? You can follow along? Nice. Next one. The next package that we have to install is this one. This package includes a bunch of tools for generating code, and you will see in a few minutes what this package does. For now, just remember you have to install it. It's called Microsoft Entity Framework Core Design. So please, again, go to NuGet, install Entity Framework Core Design. Here, select 3.0, hit install, and you should be done in a second. Good. Now your CS_proj file should look like something like this. It should include the SequelServer package and the design package. I would like to repeat, in ASP.NET Core, when we build web APIs based on this stuff, you don't need to install these packages manually. They are automatically installed for you. But we are now in a console app. And in a console app, we have to install these packages. Good? Good. Could everybody follow along? Nice. The next step in Entity Framework is the defining of the database structure. Typically, in a database structure, you start by creating database tables and columns and foreign keys and primary keys. Maybe you draw an entity relationship diagram, something like this. Not with EF, not with Entity Framework. With Entity Framework, we follow a code-first approach. So we just define C# classes, properties, and so on. And then the database will be created for us. We don't need to remember any crazy create table, alter table, create index, create primary key, or whatever statement. They will be generated for us. That's a good news, isn't it? So for that, we have to model our database content using C# classes. And that is typically done in a separate folder, add new folder. Let's call it model, because there we will put our class model. And this class model will then be turned into a database diagram. What do you want to store? Tell me something. Suggestions.
Cookies.
Cookies. Cookie recipes. Okay? Let's store cookie recipes. I like that one. So let's store cookie recipes. So please add a new class, and let's call it cookie recipe. Recipe, yeah, okay, this is the right one. I had a typo. It's good. Don't forget to make it public. First thing, if you take a look in the cheat sheet, here you have the cheat sheet, then you will see that there are some conventions which are really, really useful. And the first convention that I would like you to remember is that for every class, if you want to have a primary key, you take the name of the class plus the postfix ID to get a primary key. So I encourage you to do the following: prop tab int cookie recipe ID. And because it's called like the class cookie recipe and has the postfix ID, Entity Framework will automatically guess that you would like to have a primary key. Primary key means you get an auto number. It will automatically generate it by the database. It will be unique, so you can always find a single recipe with its ID. And it has to have a value. It must not be null. Good? If you absolutely need to use a different name because you don't like the name, then you can do that, but then you have to write key, the key attribute on top of it. We will not do that now because this will be done automatically. Just remember name of the class plus ID and we are fine. You can remember what a primary key is, right? Yeah? Good. So let's give it a name, string. A recipe could have a title, for instance. Just a string. The recipe should have the recipe text. And maybe we will do a string image URL. A URL to a photo, for instance. Yes, ingredients is a very good idea. I had that in mind too. But of course, a single cookie has multiple ingredients. It's very hard to bake a cookie out of a single ingredient. So therefore, we add a new class. We add a second class, and I would ask you to do that. Add class. Just to make sure that I don't have a typo, I always look it up. Yes, this looks good. Make it public. How do I get a primary key? Well, prop int ingredient ID. I think by now you got the idea, right? So now that we have a description, a unit of measure could be gram or kilogram or pieces or spoons or whatever. And let's do a decimal amount. Good? Everybody fine with that? Now the next step is that we have to link the cookie recipe with its ingredients. And we do that by moving back to the cookie recipe and adding a new property, list of ingredient. And this is how we join the cookie recipe to a list of ingredients.
Could you please show the
ingredients again?
ingredients again?
Here they are.
Oh, and non was the last one.
Yes. List of ingredients. And we can do it on the other end of the relationship too. We can go to ingredient and create a single reference, cookie recipe. This is the pointer back. You understand the idea? A single ingredient is just made or just written down for a single recipe. But a single recipe can have multiple ingredients, one-to-many relationship. A tip, always when you add a relationship like that, always add a second property, int recipe ID, which will receive the foreign key, in this case the integer ID of the recipe, if a recipe is linked. This will come in very handy for many situations. And Entity Framework will automatically handle that. It's called a so-called shadow property. You don't need to know that. Just remember name of the foreign key plus ID, and Entity Framework will automatically recognize that this is the shadow property for the recipe. Good? Good. I think we called it cookie recipe, right? Let's stay consistent, okay? I will rename that cookie recipe, just to be sure that we are consistent. Cookie recipe. Good? Now, without an object relational mapper, we would now need to sit down and write some SQL code. Need to sit down and write some create tables and alter tables and things like that, and we don't need to do that. But what if we want to, for instance, specify that the description is a mandatory field? It must contain a value. It must not be null. How do we do that? By typically using data annotations. Something like this. Required. Can you remember? We had that with ASP.NET Core 2, right? The description is required. We can also set the length, max length. Let's say the description can be up to 150 characters. Do you get the idea? Yeah? So with these data annotation attributes, you can closely define how, or in detail define how the database is structured. Let's quickly check in the cheat sheet whether I have it. Yes, I have it, as you can see it here. Just as a reminder, the required attribute if you need a not null column. There is a second option too. If you don't like the data annotations, what you could also do in the database context, we'll create one in a second, there is a special method on modal creating, and there you can also say for the entity blog, the column URL is required. It's a different syntax. The result is exactly the same. Yeah? I personally, for simple cases, prefer that one because it's so simple to remember and you don't need to override a method. Just write in angle brackets required and you're fine. Good? Square brackets, not angle brackets, sorry. Nice. Try to compile it. Does it still compile or do you have any syntax errors? I hope not. With that, we can start to create a data context. The database context is the main class through which you access the database. So please right-click on the project, add new class, and we will call it the cookie data context. Public, of course. The cookie data context. The cookie data context has to derive from data context. Data context comes from entity framework. DB context, sorry, not data context, DB context. My bad. DB context comes from entity framework. And there we have to create a single property for every table that we would like to create in the database. So we create a property of type dbSet of, what do we have? Cookie recipe. And we call it recipes. Is that the correct plural of recipe? Let's see. It's like this. I'm sorry that I don't know that by heart, but I rarely write cooking books in English. So this is the first table that we need. And the second one, db set, was I think ingredients, right? Yes. Ingredients. Ingredients. Typo. Good. Every db set in our db context will become a table. So in our case, we will create two tables, one which is called recipes and one is called ingredients. Good? Clear? Nice. Let's see whether this is in the cheat sheet. Yes, it is in the cheat sheet, as you see here. db set and so on, and db context. Good. The next step differs whether we want to build a console app or whether we would like to build an ASP.NET Core app. For us now, we are just in the console, so we are just building a console app. And if you build a console app, you do it as follows. You say override, and then you are looking for the onConfiguring method. You have that in my slides. In ASP.NET, that works differently. It's also on the cheat sheet how it works in ASP.NET. But for console apps, it works like this. You say onConfiguring, and then in the options builder, you can say use SequelServer. This use SequelServer this here is available because we have installed a NuGet package which was called entityframework.SequelServer. If you would use SQLite, for instance, it would be called use SQLite. If you would like to use Postgres, then it would be called use Postgres. I think you got the idea. Right? On configuring, use SequelServer, and here in the middle, it would like to have a connection string. Good? Do you know how to build a connection string? Do you know what a connection string is? I have a few tips for you. First one, there is a website which is called connectionstrings.com. I often use it. And here you have a lot of databases, see? And for instance, we can go to SequelServer, and then we have a bunch of examples how connection strings for SequelServer could look like. And you also have some code samples, how it works in C#, for instance. So whenever I have to connect to a database that I'm not that used to, I look it up at connectionstrings.com. However, there is a helper class in C#, and it's called Connection String Builder. SQL Connection String Builder, and this class is pretty handy because you can create it, as you can see it here, and then you can just set the different things like password and server and whatever, something like this. So this would be the second option. But to be honest, let's keep it simple and let's look it up in connectionstrings.com, and you can see this one looks pretty good. So I will just copy this one. It's really simple to write. In practice, I would probably use the connection string builder, but here you can now specify the server name. In my case, it's localhost. Can you remember this was the thing that I created in Docker? The database should be called cookie recipes. It shouldn't exist. This should be a new database. So if you are using an existing SQL server, specify a new database. The user ID is that one. And the password was my super secure password. I think it was called password123. I think, let me quickly check. 1234. This was my super secure password. Don't get me wrong, using a password like this is worse practice You should never, never, ever do that in real life for a production server. That's fine for a development server, but please don't ever write down a password in your source code for a production server. Never use a password like this for a production server. Bad things will happen. You will have bad karma, and you will be born as a, I don't know, whatever in your next life if you use a password that is as weak as that one. It's really important. I'm not making jokes here. Yeah, choosing good passwords for production database service is really critical. We're just playing around here, so this password is fine. Fine? Do you have it? Good. We haven't written any database code that writes data to the database or reads data from the database, but nevertheless, we have already defined the database structure. So let's go on and create the database from our C# code. So now we'll take Entity Framework tooling and create the database, create table, alter table, and so on, from our C# code. Okay? For that, I would first ask you to build your solution. See if you get any errors. It should say build succeeded, if you didn't make any mistakes. And then please open a command line directly in the folder where your project lives. I can show you how I do that typically. I right-click any of the files. No, I right-click here in the project, open folder in File Explorer, something like this, and then I just say CMD. That is one option, and you get a command shell directly in this folder. See it? Another option that I can tell you is you right-click, open in Folder Explorer, you copy the directory, and then you start something which is called the Windows Terminal. The Windows Terminal is available through the Windows Store, and it has a really, really nice terminal built in. It has nice fonts and a pretty clean look and feel, and I really like it. So it's really up to you whether you want to use the terminal or whether you want to use the CMD. Once you are here inside of this folder, you can take a look at the cheat sheet, because down below at the very bottom of the cheat sheet, I have written down a bunch of important statements that you need in order to manage the database. And the first statement that we need is this one. .NET EF migrations add, and then a migration name. .NET migrations add, .NET EF migrations, of course, sorry. I don't know, initial is a good name. Any name that you like. And you can give it a try. It will now take a look at your C# code and will try to figure out how to generate additional C# code that can create a database from scratch. And if you did everything correctly, it should say done. If not, you get a lot of red output and you have to read it and see what is wrong. Can I help anybody in overcoming some problems? Good. Okay, so now we have fixed all problems on all laptops, and we have successfully ran the .NET EF migrations add, and the result, even if some of you are still installing some software, you can take a look at the video beamer. The result is that we now have code generated in this migrations folder. You see it? This migrations folder now contains C# code. You can take a look at it, but don't change it. It contains code with which your project can now create a database from scratch. So if we take a look, we have a bunch of code where you see, it creates primary keys and it creates columns and nullable and so on. Of course, you could have written this code by hand, but typically you don't do that. You just write your classes and your properties, and you generate the code that is maintaining your database by using this Entity Framework migrations. Get the idea? Good. Now we still don't have a database. If I take a look in my database that I have here now, there is no database cookies here. So let's now create the database, and this can be done with the next statement from our cheat sheet. Before you run this statement, please do me a favor and run this one. It will not create a database for you. But just run it and take a look what's going to happen. If you are still installing software on your machine, don't worry, take a look at the video beamer. It is easy to follow along. See it? This .NET EF migrations script will create a SQL script with which you can create the database tables and alter them and so on and so on. Do you get the idea? That is what this thing does. So now I could take this script and run it on my database server. But it is even more simple by running this script here. And this will do all the necessary things on the database for you. .NET EF database update. Please execute that. .NET EF database update. It will connect to the database, run the script, and create the tables. If you selected the wrong connection string, then things will go wrong. If your connection string is correct, as on the video beamer here, you should now have a database. I have it in my Docker container with my tables. Where can I help? Okay, I would like to give you a tip. Some of you try to follow along with the Docker stuff and you have some problems with too short passwords and maybe some problems with Linux and Windows and so on. I really encourage you to get SequelServer and install it locally. You will definitely need SequelServer in some of your exams and so on. So if you look on my slides, you see a link here on the slide number 2 in the Entity Framework area. You have a link to SequelServer Developer Edition. You see that here? The Developer Edition, if you follow this link, this one, the Developer Edition, is a fully featured free edition of SequelServer. Maybe you can do that until the next lesson when we see each other again. Please download the SequelServer Developer Edition and install it on your laptops. Then you don't need any kind of Docker anymore. If you like Docker and if it works, fine. But if you struggling with Docker, install the Developer Edition and everything is good. Okay? Can I have your attention again? We have 20 minutes left and I need to show you a little bit more code and then we can spend the rest of the time fixing some issues, okay? But I have to show you a bunch of features so that I can give you the homework because we'll see each other for a pretty long time, not because next week is free and then I will be absent for 1 week. So we have to finish the examples here. I will record it if you now have problems and you can just follow along on the video beamer, that's fine because you can rewatch the video afterwards. Now we have created the database. You see the database is here, that's fine. And we have a data model, that's here. And now I would like to access the database. How do I access the database? Together with me, please take a look at the cheat sheet. At the cheat sheet, I added you 2 sections which are important for your examples. The first one is called query data and the second one is called saving data. Both contain important statements that you will need to query data and save data, and they include links to the relevant documentation. First, let's generate a little bit of data. Please follow this link, saving data. By the way, I will make sure that during the Matura, the docs.microsoft.com domain will be available for you. So when you work on this stuff, these links, they will work, okay? So you don't need to learn all these commands by heart. You can just look it up also during the Matura. That's important. So here in the saving data area, you have 3 important things. The first one is currently relevant for us, basic save. Please go to basic save. And there you have a code snippet with which you can insert data in the database. It's pretty trivial. you create the context, you create an instance of your class, you add it to the DB set, and you save the changes, and that's all you have to do. Let's try that. Let's copy this code into our main method, and of course we have to do some changes. First, our context is not called blogging context, it's called cookie data context. We are not creating blogs, but we create cookie recipes. A cookie recipe has a title, chocolate cookies. It has a recipe text, mix, blah, blah, blah. So good. Image URL, HTTPS, chocolatecookie.com. I don't know if that exists. I hope it's not. Let me quickly check. Okay, it doesn't exist. Good. Last but not least, we have to add the recipe. That's simple. Just say recipes.add and add. Oh, blog is a bad name. This is a cookie, and save changes. That's it. Not really difficult, is it? Of course, there are more complex use cases, and this is the reason why I wrote the cheat sheet for you and why I linked the relevant documentation in the Microsoft Docs. So for your homework, you will probably have to read a little bit of the Microsoft Docs. If you're fine with that, just run your application. If you have the SQL Server running, if not, just take a look at the code and see how beautiful it is. But if you run your code and your database server is up and running, then after running your code, we should be able to see, let's see, select star from recipes. Let's go, and oh, here it is. See it? So if you now take a look at the C# code, this C# code has no ugly SQL statements in it, no strings, no insert statement, no insert values, no select, no nothing. It's pure C#, and still you can nicely access the database. Get it? Now what if we want to read some data? That's simple. We just use link. Can you remember we had that before with the .where and skip and take and select and all this stuff? If not, from now on we will do a lot of link. For instance, we can say var cookies equals to context.recipes dot, let's say, dot where cookie c contains c dot. Oh, sorry, where of course needs a using statement. Don't forget to add the using statement using system.link. And I would like to say recipe text contains choco, because we are looking for chocolate cookies. And at the end we say to array, and we are good. This is select star from recipes where recipe like choco percentage. Get the idea? We can set a breakpoint here run it. And if everything turns out right, we should now get back 2 cookies because I inserted the second one. Let's see. Oh, I made a mistake. You see, this is the title. My title contains chocolate cookies, not the recipe text. Here is a mistake. Title contains choco. If I run it again, I have 3 cookies because every time I insert a new cookie. And now we have cookies. Yoo-hoo! And you see, we got exactly our chocolate cookies. Do you understand the value of Entity Framework and why it is really nice to work with this? Now in ASP.NET Core, this wouldn't be good code. You don't absolutely need to follow along the changes that I do now because they should already be obvious for you. In ASP.NET Core, I told you that everything should be async. So we don't use save changes, but we should use save changes async, and we should do what? Await. Exactly. Await, and hopefully you can remember async task. Exactly. Good. So you can remember. That's good. So that is best practice. Always use the async methods. And here there is also an async method. It's not called toArray, but it's called toArray async. Await. You have to add a using statement for that. But whenever you do something with Entity Framework, you always want to do non-blocking I/O. Otherwise, your servers will be very, very slow and not very efficient. Otherwise, the code works exactly identical. Good? Clear so far? It looks really trivial now, but it is not as trivial. So we have enough to talk about in the upcoming weeks. However, the next 2 lessons will not take place because next week is holiday and the week after I will be absent. But I want to make sure that you have something to do. Therefore, I have a homework for you. Of course. This homework might be a little different. I never gave you such a homework yet this year. So the homework that I gave you, it's already in WebUntis, is the cache desk homework. I gave you 2 homeworks, one in mobile computing and one in C#. Don't worry, the mobile computing stuff is until in 4 weeks. So if you want, you can take a look at it, but we will see each other again before you really have to work on this homework. Yeah. So the thing that you should now focus on is the programming homework, it's the cache desk homework. And it works like this. I gave you, in the cache desk folder, I gave you an implementation of some methods, and they are all, as you can see, empty. They all contain throw new not implemented exception. Additionally, I gave you a file which is called contracts. And this file contracts contains some modal information, interfaces. As you can see, always interfaces. And at the end, the important thing is an iData access. It contains a detailed specification what your methods should be able to do. And you have to fill in the blanks. So you have to read the documentation. For instance here, adds a member, returns the number of the new member, and blah, blah, blah. And then you go into this file implementation, go to the add member async, and then you have to replace this line with a proper implementation. And how do you know whether you are correct? I wrote unit tests for you. So you have in your solution a bunch of unit tests, and your job is to get these tests green. You can earn an extra point by sending me a GitHub issue that all your tests are green. And you must not touch the tests. I will recognize if you just change the text to expect true to be true. Okay, I will recognize that. Yeah. So you have to implement code, not change the tests. You get the idea? So it's a kind of challenge. Try to understand what I did there and try to fill in the blanks. Everything is related to Entity Framework. So you have to insert rows, delete rows, you have to update rows, you have to select rows. Just a bunch of lines to edit the database content. To make your life simpler, I have an additional tip for you. If we quickly take a look at the cheat sheet, where is my cheat sheet? I think it was here, right? No, it was... Here is the cheat sheet. In the cheat sheet, you will see that there are more database providers. This is important if you want to do the homework. Please listen to me for the last few minutes. If we take a look at the database providers, you will see that there is a specific database provider which is called in-memory. And for tests or for learning Entity Framework like this, in-memory is super useful because you don't need a database for that. It just stores your data in memory. If you kill your application and restart it, everything is gone and you can start from a clean slate. You understand what I mean? So in that case, you don't say use SequelServer and you don't install Entity Framework core.SequelServer, but instead you install Microsoft Entity Framework core.in-memory. It makes your life easier because otherwise you always have to manually delete the data from the database to start from a fresh database over and over again. That's boring. But if you use the in-memory provider for this example, then you will start from a fresh database always from the beginning. You get the idea? Of course, I have created an example for that too. So if you take a look in my GitHub repository and just take a look at the first introductional sample, you will see that it's really simple to use that. Just say use in memory. To make it very clear what we did. Today we said use SequelServer. Then we are using a SequelServer. But now you can say use in memory database and everything works fine and you don't need a database. And for this homework, that's enough. If you want to do it with SequelServer, I'm fine. But in memory is enough. Question?
Is address the name of the table?
It's any name. You can write dummy there. It doesn't matter. You could create multiple in-memory databases in a single application and then maybe the name would matter if you would like to distribute it in two different in-memory databases. But for this simple homework, it doesn't matter. You can write whatever you want. Good? So, don't underestimate the importance of Entity Framework for your Matura. If you are good with Entity Framework and you practice in the upcoming weeks all the Entity Framework stuff that we do together, then you will have a much easier ride in your Matura than if you just ignore Entity Framework and you think you start Googling through while you're sitting at the Matura. That wouldn't be a good idea. Okay? Good. With that, I'm through with my content of today. I think we can close and we will see each other in 3 weeks. If you have any problems with the homework, please send me a GitHub issue. Yes, questions?
Do you know